Welcome to the Grateful Living podcast. Join us for this week's episode. Hi, beautiful souls. Welcome back to the Grateful Living podcast. I actually wasn't planning on recording this episode today. The inspiration came from somewhere completely unexpected. Sitting in the hairdressers. When I first walked in, the room felt really quiet, not peaceful quiet, more like an awkward quiet. You know, those moments where everyone seems to be waiting for someone to say something first. Like that. Nobody's done anything wrong, but you can kind of feel the tension in the air. And I sat down and I immediately noticed my mind doing what it used to do. You know, should I say something? What if they don't want to talk? What if I interrupt? What if I ask a stupid question? And for a few moments, I found myself waiting for somebody else to change the atmosphere, waiting for somebody else to make the room feel more relaxed. And then I caught myself. I remember thinking, hang on a minute, why am I waiting for someone else to change the energy? What if I could be the person who changes it? So I started asking questions. I admitted I had absolutely no idea what I was asking for with my hair. We laughed and the conversation started flowing. The room literally felt lighter. And as I drove home afterwards, I realised something that I've never really put into words before. We spend so much of our lives walking into rooms hoping they'll make us feel comfortable. We walk into a workplace hoping people will be friendly. We go to the networking events hoping someone will come over and speak to us. We arrive at family gatherings hoping somebody else breaks the silence. We sit in waiting rooms hoping that someone else starts the conversation. We're constantly waiting for the room to give us permission to relax. But what if we've got it the wrong way round? What if every single one of us has far more influence over the atmosphere around us than we actually realise? What if confidence isn't about walking into a room and commanding attention? What if confidence is about walking into a room and helping other people feel comfortable? That one thought stayed with me for the rest of the day. Because the more I reflected on it, the more I realised that this isn't really about a hairdresser's appointment at all. It's about how we show up in every part of our lives. It's about the energy we bring into our workplaces, into our friendships, relationships, families, treatment rooms, coaching sessions, even into the queue at the supermarket. Wherever we go, we leave people with a feeling. People might not remember every word we said. They might not remember what we were wearing. They might not even remember the conversation itself. But they'll often remember how they felt after spending time with us. And I don't know about you, but when I really thought about that, it felt like such an empowering realization, because it means I don't have to wait for the world to become kinder before I choose kindness. I don't have to wait for somebody else to smile before I smile. I don't have to wait for someone else to ask how I'm doing before I ask them how they're doing. I get to choose the energy I bring. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should pretend to be happy all the time. I'm not saying we should ignore our own emotions or become responsible for everybody else's. That's not what I'm talking about. This is not what this episode is about. It's about recognizing that our presence has an impact, whether we realize it or not. And once we've recognized that, we also get to decide what kind of impact we want to have. The realization completely changed the way I looked at confidence, because for years, I thought confidence meant people noticing me. Now I think confidence is something completely different. I think confidence is about making people feel noticed. And that's what I want to explore with you today. One of the things I realized after leaving the hairdressers was that the awkwardness I felt had very little to do with the salon itself. It made me curious. I started asking myself, why do I always feel like this in places like that? And when I sat down with it for a while, the answer made complete sense. When my mum became ill, I was really young and she passed away when I was 14. So there were so many little things that she never got a chance to teach me, not because she didn't want to or because she didn't love me, simply because life unfolded the way that it did. Nobody ever showed me what to ask at a hair appointment. No one ever taught me about looking after my hair or my skincare or my beauty routines. I didn't have those little mother-daughter moments that so many people experience without even thinking about them. And I think for years I carried this unconscious belief that everybody else knew what they were doing except me. It sounds so small when I say it out loud. It's only a hair appointment, but that's the funny thing about healing. Sometimes it isn't the big moments that reveal what still need healing. Sometimes it's the small, most ordinary moments that show us the stories we've been carrying. Because I realised something else, I wasn't actually afraid of getting my hair done. I was afraid of looking like I didn't belong. I was afraid of asking what felt like a very silly question, or afraid that everyone else had some secret knowledge that I didn't. And I wonder how many of us do that in different areas of our lives. Maybe for you it isn't a hairdresser's. Maybe it's walking into a gym or starting a new job or becoming a parent. We convince ourselves that everyone else knows exactly what they're doing. But here's something I've learned over the years. Most people are figuring it out as they go. They're just better at hiding it. And the moment I admitted to my hairdresser, I'm actually not sure what I need, something really interesting happened. I didn't feel judged or embarrassed. I felt supported. She was pretty open and she made me feel comfortable. And I thought, imagine how many years I've been carrying this unnecessary pressure to have all the answers before asking for help. How often do we stop ourselves asking a question because we're worried it makes us look inexperienced? How often do we stay quiet because we don't want people to realize we don't know something? How often do we pretend we're okay because asking for help feels more uncomfortable than struggling on our own? And that's when another thought came to me. Maybe confidence isn't about having all of the answers. Maybe confidence is being secure enough to admit when you don't. And there's something incredibly powerful about saying, I don't know. I've never done this before. Can you help me understand? Because vulnerability doesn't always make us look weak. More often than not, it creates connection. People trust honesty. People relate to honesty. And I think that's something we've forgotten. We spend so much of our time trying to appear confident that we forget authenticity is often what makes people feel comfortable around us in the first place. That day at the hairdresser's reminded me that I didn't need to pretend I knew everything. I just needed to be myself. And funnily enough, that's exactly what changed the energy of the room. Funnily enough, this wasn't actually the first time I'd learned that lesson. Years ago when I worked in sales, and if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you'll know that that version of me looked very different to the person you're listening to today. When I first started, I had very little confidence. I questioned whether I belonged there. I worried about saying the wrong thing. I overthought conversations. I felt like I was bothering people. And if I'm being completely honest, that wasn't just happening at work. That was the story I was carrying through so many areas of my life. I felt like an inconvenience. I found it difficult to ask for what I needed. I found it difficult to take up space. And I found it difficult to believe that I had anything valuable to offer. So I did what a lot of us do. I thought confidence meant becoming louder, having the perfect script, knowing what to say, being the most experienced person in the room. But sales taught me something completely different. It taught me that people don't connect with perfection. They connect with presence. This is one of the first things we're taught in sales, was something called the C principle. Smile, eye contact, enthusiasm. At the time, I thought they were just communication techniques, but looking back at it now, I realised they were teaching us something much deeper. Most people are waiting. They're waiting for someone else to smile first, someone else to introduce themselves, someone else to ask the first question, someone else to break the silence. But influence begins with the person who's willing to go first. And another thing I was taught has stayed with me ever since. By the end of a conversation, you should know 3 things about the other person and they should know 3 things about you. Not because you're ticking boxes, but because relationships are built through genuine curiosity. And I loved that because it shifted my attention from myself. Instead of wondering, do they like me? I started wondering, who are they? What matters to them? What are they passionate about? How can I make this person feel comfortable? Can you see how different those 2 mindsets are? One is completely focused on yourself. The other is completely focused on connection. And here's what surprised me. The less I worried about impressing people, the easier conversations became. The less I worried about sounding clever, the more people opened up. The more genuinely interested I became in other people, the more confident I felt. Not because I'd suddenly become fearless, but because my attention wasn't trapped inside my own head anymore. It was on the person in front of me. And I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about confidence. We think confidence is about being noticed. standing out, being impressive, having all the right words. But I don't think that's confidence anymore. I think confidence is making other people feel like they matter. Because when somebody leaves a conversation feeling seen, heard, understood, they don't always remember that you had all the perfect answers. They remember how you made them feel. And I had no idea at the time just how important that lesson was going to become. Because if you'd asked me back then what I thought of myself, I wouldn't have had many nice things to say. Outside of work, I was struggling with my self-worth. I constantly questioned myself. I felt like I wasn't enough. I felt like everything I did was wrong, and I genuinely didn't see anything particularly special about me. But something strange started happening. People would light up when they saw me. Clients would tell me they'd been looking forward to seeing me. People would come back and ask for me. Team members would stop me and say thank you. Sometimes people would say, "You've made my day." And every single time I think, really? Because I couldn't see in myself what other people seemed to see in me. It wasn't until one of my coaches reflected something back to me that everything started to make sense. They said, "Have you noticed what people always say about you?" And I hadn't, because when something comes naturally to you, you often assume it comes naturally to everyone else. They said, "People always say you make them feel comfortable." That sentence stayed with me, not because I'd been trying to do it, but because I hadn't realised it was something worth noticing. I thought everyone made people feel comfortable. I thought everyone listened, or that everyone naturally wanted to understand people. The more I paid attention, the more I realised that wasn't true. People would tell me things that they'd never told anyone else. People would ask for my advice. They'd open up within minutes of meeting me. And I started to ask myself why. It certainly wasn't because I had all the answers, or because I was the most experienced, or I had the loudest personality. It was because people felt safe. I remember there were times at work when someone would come over to me after speaking to another person, and they'd quietly say, "Can I ask you something?" Or, "I don't really know how to approach them," or, "I'm worried about how they're going to react." And I realised something that completely changed the way I viewed influence. People weren't coming to me because I had a different job title. They were coming to me because they felt emotionally safe with me. That was one of the biggest compliments I could have ever received, because creating safety isn't always about saying the perfect thing. It's about the way you make someone feel when they're with you. Do they feel judged or accepted? Do they feel rushed or listened to? Do they feel like they have to prove themselves, or do they feel like they can just breathe? That's when I realised that influence has very little to do with being the loudest person in the room. Some of the most influential people I've ever met have been the quietest. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They were simply fully present. And presence is something people can feel. That's exactly why I try to create it now in every treatment room, coaching session, workshop, and conversation. Before I think about techniques, knowledge, or what I'm about to say, I ask myself a question. How can I help this person feel safe? Because when someone feels safe, they open up, they relax, they trust, they heal. And I honestly believe that's true whether you're a coach, therapist, leader, parent, partner, or simply a friend. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give another human being is the feeling that they don't have to pretend around you. So if you're listening to this episode today, I want to leave you with a question. How do people feel when they've spent time with you? Not what do they think about you, or whether you think you're successful enough or pretty enough or interesting enough. Just how do they feel? Do they feel calmer? Do they feel listened to? Do they feel encouraged? Do they leave feeling a little lighter than they did before they met you? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that your presence is your greatest gift. Long after people have forgotten the conversation, they'll often remember how you made them feel. And the beautiful thing is, you don't have to have the biggest personality to create that impact. You don't have to be the funniest person in the room or the loudest or have all the answers. You simply have to be willing to care, to be present, to be curious, to listen, to smile first, to ask the questions that nobody else asked, to notice the person who's standing on their own, or to remember someone's name, or even just putting your phone away for 5 minutes to give somebody your full attention. Those little things might seem insignificant, but I promise you they're not. Because every single one of those moments tells another human being, I see you, you matter, I'm here with you. And we need more of that, now more than ever. I also want to say something to those of you who are listening and thinking, but Talisha, what if I'm having a really difficult day? What if I don't have the energy to be that person? And I completely understand. This isn't about pretending you're okay when you're not, and it's not about masking your emotions or feeling responsible for everybody else's happiness. You're allowed to have bad days, you're allowed to need support, and you're allowed to be the one asking for help. But I always come back to this one sentence that has carried me through some of the most hardest moments of my life. When you can't find the light, be the light. And I don't mean forcing yourself to be positive. I mean choosing one small act of kindness, a genuine smile, a thoughtful message, one compliment, one conversation where someone walks away feeling a little less alone. Because here's the beautiful thing. Those moments don't just change the other person's day. Very often they change yours too. Looking back now, I'm actually really grateful for that quiet moment in the hairdressers, because it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. I walked in waiting for the room to change. I walked out remembering that I had the power to change it. And that's what I want to leave with you today. The next time you walk into work or into the gym or a coffee shop or a networking event or a family gathering, ask yourself one simple question. What energy do I want to bring into this room? Because whether you realize it or not, you're already influencing the people around you. The only question is, what do you want them to remember? Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I'd love for you to send me a message over on Instagram and let me know what stood out to you, or share this episode with someone who comes to mind when you were listening. And until next time, take good care. Thank you for listening to today's episode. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at _the_grateful_living.